Hey guys, what's up? It's a Culture Detective here, investigating your favorite movies, and yesterday I watched The Shrouds. This is a new movie from Canadian filmmaker, auteur, body horror legend David Cronenberg, and I got to see his film at an AMC theater with David Cronenberg showing up at the end for a Q&A. Absolutely bonkers. So right now I'm going to show you guys the Q&A, some of the highlights from that Q&A, and then I'll continue with that review.
You fire up the GraveTech app that you've downloaded from our website, and with that, you control your
amazing film, The Shrouds. So please help me give a warm welcome to the legendary David Cronenberg. Well, thank you so much for being here with us and to chat about this, the Charlie XCX performance at Coachella last night. Did you see, perhaps you've seen that she announced that it could be a Cronenberg summer if one so chose it to be?
I did see that.
Okay.
I was very surprised, I must say. I had no idea that she was even aware of, or her people were aware of my existence, so that's always exciting. I wasn't really, for example, in Videodrome, people like to think that it anticipates the internet and interactive television and so on. And when you look at it, you have to say, yeah, it really kind of does. But I wasn't really thinking of that. It was my own experience of what was going on. And I mean, I suppose in a way I'm similar in some ways in that my form of creativity is movies. And so I'm dealing with that, my own grief in a movie. But I have to say that once, yes, I had a wife of 43 years who died in 2017. And that was certainly the impetus for me to make this movie. But as soon as you start to write a screenplay, you are creating fiction. You're creating.
Fess up.
Okay, thank God. Well, it's a funny movie. I mean, all of my movies are funny, basically. Casting is a hugely important part of directing. It's not something they teach you in film school, but it is part of directing. And if you can...
Hundreds of years, but okay. I think there's a real opportunity here.
Yeah, I mean, by the way, I'm thinking about franchises. If any of you are interested in investment, you could just have one grave in your backyard to start with, and then sort of work from there to world domination.
Yeah. And restaurants and cemeteries is really an opportunity.
Have a good meal, and then you bury yourself. So yeah, it's so complex. So there must be something else going on. And I think conspiracy is well known. I mean, it gives you the sense of specialness. It gives you the sense that you can see what's really going on past the facade that presents itself as reality.
So David Cronenberg is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting filmmakers ever. He's been making movies since the late 60s, but his most prime work, his most notable works, are actually in the 80s and 90s, and even till now he is still making films at the age of 83. But in order to understand David Cronenberg, you need to know that his filmography, his oeuvre, comes in different eras. Of course, we have Cronenberg's early years, his student years when he made student films, and then of course we have his prime years where we have films like Videodrome, The Fly, and then slowly but surely we enter more of an era where he would adapt from novels like Dead Ringers, which is still very much a body horror thing, but he's slowly getting away from that with films like M. Butterfly, and then he kind of returned to that a little bit with Crash and Existenz, and then we enter the 2000s where David Cronenberg begins to diverge his style further. Instead of focusing on body horror, he focuses things that are even more subtle, even more hidden, even more nuanced, films that explore violence, like A History of Violence, Eastern Promises, and then we have other films, period films, weird sci-fi excursions, Cosmopolis, Map to the Stars, which is in 2014. Now, he made a bit of a comeback in 2022 with the film Crimes of the Future. That is his first film in 8 years, and I watched it when it came out in the public in the USA. And I was expecting a part 2 of Videodrome. I was expecting Cronenberg to fully plunge himself back into gross, weird, crazy techno body horror, and I was really excited. So I went to Crimes of the Future really having my hopes high, especially considering that it was really well received at the Cannes Film Festival, or not well received, but it was well received by my friends at the time, and also it was in competition for Cannes, so I was like, okay, it's got to be really good, right? I watched it, and I was left extremely confused and kind of disappointed. What the hell was that? So, yeah, it's kind of a body horror film, but it is a deconstruction of a body horror film. It's not that scary. The story is really meandering. It's really slow. The acting is really awkward. And most of the film is just people talking to other people, and then the last act is really good, of course, and then it just kind of ends at a really strange note. So I was quite disappointed, and I remember giving this film like a strong 6 out of 10 or something. But if I were to be honest, at the time I was feeling more of a light 6. But anyways, I didn't get it. I didn't get it. I did not enjoy Crimes of the Future. But if I were to know David Cronenberg's entire filmography and how his storytelling has evolved throughout time, I would probably understand more as to why he intentionally made Crimes of the Future like this. It's not that he's bad at body horror, like he's not as good anymore, but it is intentional. So it's very interesting. And his new film came out last year at the Cannes Film Festival called The Shrouds. And it is his longest film to date, and it's only 2 hours long. And it is a film about Vincent Cassel, who plays Karsh, Karsh, that's his name. And his wife recently died. And he developed this technology where he could place a camera in the shrouds of the which is wrapping around the corpse, and by doing so he can look at the decaying corpse of his wife, which is really dark, it's very morbid and very sad. And that is body horror, all right, that is body horror, but that is literally the only element of body horror in the entire film, so much so that I don't even think you can call The Shrouds a body horror film. In fact, if you go to Letterboxd right now and check genre, you'll find that it is considered sci-fi and drama, because it's actually not a horror film. In fact, it is a sci-fi, but I think it's even more so a dark comedy, actually. So this film is about grief. It's about Vincent Cassel's character dealing with his wife's death, and by doing so, he hooked up with his dead wife's twin sister, played by Diane Kruger, and also this weird relationship with his dead wife's sister's ex-husband, played by Guy Pearce. And there's this other woman, played by Sandrine Holt, who is sort of not related to any of this, but has an affair with Karsh anyways. So obviously, there's not a lot of storytelling in this film, or there is a lot of storytelling, but it doesn't go anywhere. So for fans who are expecting another Videodrome, another The Fly, you're going to be disappointed. But for me, having seen Crimes of the Future, I kind of know that Cronenberg is going for something different here. So it's so fascinating because this film is the lowest rated film in all of the in competition films last year at the Cannes Film Festival. Yet, according to my friend, who is a huge cinephile, this is his favorite film out of the entire festival. Apparently, David Cronenberg is really ahead of his time, which is crazy considering that he's only 83. But apparently, not a lot of people understood him because this film is so ahead. This film is so out there that a lot of people just thought, wow, it's bad filmmaking, it's bad storytelling, but it's just people just don't get it apparently. So here's my way of dissecting this film. First of all, let's get the elephant out of the room. This film is about grief, and David Cronenberg has made it pretty clear that this film is partially inspired by the fact that his wife died. Back in 2017, David Cronenberg's wife, who had lived with Cronenberg for over 40 something years, had died of cancer. Literally exactly the same thing happens inside the Shrouds. People also pointed out that Vincent Cassel in the Shrouds looks like David Cronenberg with the white hair, with the dark suits, even though in the Q&A David Cronenberg explicitly said that they're not alike. It's fictional. When he created this character, it's completely fictional, or mostly fictional anyways. But you do have to admit that this is easily Cronenberg's most personal and most autobiographical film. Now, this film is about grief, but it is also a very special film about grief. It doesn't approach grief in a very spiritual way, nor does it approach grief in a very nor does it approach grief in a very dark and depressing way. In fact, this film is funny. It's probably his funniest film. I don't know because I haven't seen his entire filmography, but there are so many moments in this film that are just downright hilarious. And according to Cronenberg, the Cannes audience were too afraid to laugh because it's such a big, serious event and everyone's in suits and stuff. But in my theater, a lot of people laughed, and I actually really enjoyed that. This is even funnier than it is scary, but I think the most important thing about this film is that it is simultaneously funny and simultaneously really depressing and tragic. And I think it's a very interesting angle to look at grief because you see grief and you have several ways to cope with grief and cope with your loved ones being dead. One way to cope with it is humor and to find irony and all that. The other way to cope with it is conspiracy, which is what this film really is about. It's about conspiracy in the age of high tech. So in this film, Cronenberg pays a lot of attention to the current digital era that we live in right now. Everything from Teslas to apps, AI, surveillance, hackers. And then we have Guy Pearce's character, who is freaking hilarious. And he is basically this huge conspiracy guy who keeps making these conspiracy theories. And that is in some ways allegorical to the way Vincent Cassel's character deal with grief. Maybe she shouldn't have died. Maybe she would have lived more if I did this and I did that, and try to make excuses for her death when in fact death is death. Death is meaningless, and by trying to add meaning onto it, you're just making up conspiracy theories, trying to find some kind of solace to it. Another way to cope with death is to not look at your dead wife as a real person, but as a corpse or as just a body. And that's exactly what happened in the second scene of the film, where this woman asks Vincent Cassel's character, Karsh, "Is this your coping strategy to grief? by looking at your dead wife pathologically. And I think this is also Cronenberg just asking himself that question. So again, there's no straightforward story. It's not a particularly confusing or trippy film either. This film just presents a bunch of scenarios, and you just kind of have to interpret it, decrypt it, decode it, and then just make it of what you will. And yeah, the acting is intentionally bad. The dialogue is intentionally bad. No way. Way. Or when Guy Pearce was bleeding, Karsh was like, "Why are you bleeding?" "Oh, it's nothing. I bleed when I'm stressed." And they're bad acting, but then in some ways you can argue, yeah, that's bad acting. Bad acting makes a film bad. Yeah. But if it's intentionally bad, maybe that's something Cronenberg wants to say about grief, or maybe it's just something Cronenberg wants to say in reaction to, I guess, modern acting. The plot is meandering. Things keep happening again and again. Karsh talks to this person, Karsh talks to that person, Karsh talks to this person again, and the whole film is just talking. And it's very much a deconstruction of a drama. It's not a very intense film at all. And it's just kind of confusing, kind of meandering, kind of sad, kind of funny, kind of morbid, a little here, a little there. And that's basically Cronenberg's perception of grief and dealing with grief and that process. Yeah, the production design is really clean, it's really polished. The lighting is very subtle, it's cold. But Cronenberg wants to emphasize that his films are not cold. The music, I like the music. I think Howard Shore has always been amazing in Cronenberg films. I think the only obvious gripe I have with this film is that the ending didn't hit as hard as I hoped it would. I think the ending of Crimes of the Future hit me a little harder than this film. But yeah, this is definitely a film that needs multiple rewatches. I feel like this is less of a review, more of a first impressions. And also, apparently, Cronenberg wants to retire after this film, and I feel like The Shrouds being the last film in his filmography is not a bad way to end off the filmography. I think it is a very interesting way to end it off at a very anti-horror way. Anti-drama, anti-horror kind of way. Okay, so the film was so confusing that I somehow forgot to give a score, so I'm giving The Shrouds a 7 out of 10. So yeah, this is my thoughts on The Shrouds. What are yours? I'm genuinely interested to know what other people think of The Shrouds. Comments below, let me know, subscribe if you want more. Thanks for watching.